Good day, and thank you for tuning in to a new episode of a Microdose Diet. My guest today is Jon Kamin. So Jon is the co-founder of Frshminds, a platform bringing you everything you need to know about psychedelic retreats. So he's going to share his insights on the psychedelic industry and in particular about his interest pertaining to psychedelic retreats. My name is Peggy van der Plassche. I am a former banker and venture capitalist. I now speak and write about the psychedelic industry and of the benefits of strategically microdosing psilocybin. I created the Microdose Diet, a 90-day plan for success and happiness. And you can follow my work on Substack, LinkedIn, YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. So, Jon, thank you so much for being here today. It's really a pleasure to have you with us.
Oh, same here. Thank you very much for having me, Peggy.
No, that's great. So I really want you to explain a bit more about Frshminds. What is the business model and why did you decide to focus on psychedelic retreats?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started Frshminds actually in the summer of 2020, and it was myself and a few partners who had worked together in the cannabis industry and found that, for founders to join an industry that's really sort of nascent like that, the rules really haven't been established yet. The big global players, from a digital perspective, the Googles and the Facebooks of the world sort of reticent to participate. It leaves it open for a lot of really interesting opportunities that otherwise they would sort of come along and swallow up. And maybe most importantly, once you start to get to meet people in those industries, you find that it's just you're working with people who really kind of want to help each other. It's a very different dynamic. You're all sort of building this together. And 10 years out, there's probably going to be some who are more successful in doing that than others. But in those early days, you just get this real great sense of camaraderie, which is very different than I'd experienced elsewhere. So we decided to, we were all working very well together coming out of cannabis. And in summer of 2020, we all said, hey, let's look at what this next thing will be. We're consumer focused people. So we run digital businesses that are very much sort of B2C. And, in the psychedelics market, which is so early and so, ill written in terms of sort of the rules there and where those consumer opportunities are, it wasn't really clear to us on day one what we should do. In fact, I recall, we interviewed you probably 18 months ago in the summer of 2021. As we spoke to people in the industry, really got a sense for, different stakeholders, what different people were doing. Obviously, pharmaceutical development was kind of, 99% of the activity and conversation, and that's not us. And when we looked at different consumer models, we said, hey, everybody's sort of, there's some buzz around ketamine clinics, and it didn't seem like we could really be helpful there. And, in digital, at the end of the day, if you're not helping somebody, solve a problem, you're not really doing much of anything. So you're like, okay, I don't think if you live in Cincinnati and there's one infusion clinic, then we don't really need to tell you where it is, right? You can figure that out for yourself. So probably in the summer of 2022, as we're sort of, interviewing people in the industry, getting to know who's doing what, it really kind of congealed for us that, the retreat market, as much as it's growing substantially today, and there's a lot of interest in it, and it's sort of entered the zeitgeist in certainly in North American sort of culture and Western Europe as well. It's only going to continue, right? There's going to be a tremendous amount of growth as new jurisdictions open up, either on a decriminalized basis or fully legalized. As more and more people get pulled in, they start to speak to people they know who've had good experiences and sort of passing that back. It really just starts to build. So at a certain point, sort of last summer, we said, this is the consumer opportunity for us. Let's really understand who the audience is, who that consumer is, what it is that they need, and what it is that, no one's able to provide. So that was kind of the beginning of our path down into retreats.
So I'm curious, so who's the audience actually?
Yeah, when we speak to not just taking a look at sort of our users, but also, in February of 2023, just a few months ago, I actually went to Costa Rica and Mexico myself and met with 30 retreat operators all over those two countries and was asking them exactly that question, what do you see in terms of signups? And I think, maybe the best encapsulation of that was a retreat operator said, it's sort of a third. You've got a third of the participants who are coming because they've got a clinical issue that they can't shake,
Okay.
and sort of last resort kind of thinking. And it might be severe clinical depression, pharmaceutical resistant, could be addiction. You've got another third for whom it's not exactly an acute situation, but they're kind of stuck. They're suffering from anxiety, depression. They might be on SSRIs, but wouldn't say that it's not being helped, but they're looking for something to help better, with greater sort of longevity to the support. And then there's a third who are looking for sort of personal growth, right? It's all about learning, how do I sort of make, optimize my brain is probably a good way to think about it.
Okay.
And from a demographic perspective, they were almost all universal, sort of late 30s to early 50s, female, probably if I was going to sort of design what that typical user and consumer would look like, female, has at least a kid at home, maybe a couple, married to somebody like me, which brings its own intrinsic challenges. And they're just looking for, kind of stuck in their lives. Their career isn't really giving them a lot of, sort of lift or purpose. And they just feel like they're missing something. So they're looking to this as an alternative.
And Frshminds, and I know the business model also, but I don't want to put words in your mouth for people listening and watching us. So it really brings together this audience and the different retreats that you vet. So people can look for the criteria and, I don't know, the geography, the type of psychedelics. Tell me a bit more about the platform itself.
Yeah, so the platform, part of when we started a few years ago, we were building sort of a resource for all things psychedelic. So you could find a lot of great, sort of a library of deep information about the different compounds, about the science that's coming out, about, different applications. We had, what I colloquially call drug dealers with websites, who were clients of ours, and they're, online dispensaries for whom you can purchase. We had ketamine clinics. While we didn't really see an opportunity in that business model to bring all that content on, it's actually done a great service for us, because as we focus in on the retreats specifically, so many users who are coming to learn more about retreats and see what's available, they don't have that great sort of foundational knowledge about what psychoactive compounds are even available. I hear a lot about ayahuasca, but there's so many more. And the proponents of Bufo or 5-MeO-DMT, like, they will all say, well, hey, don't forget about us, because actually this is also a very powerful psychoactive. It can also help you with a litany of issues. So don't get stuck on sort of psilocybin. And I think all of this great content that we're bringing to the table from that earlier version of Frshminds, it's just sort of serving to educate that user and make them more qualified in what it is that they're looking to accomplish and where to get that information.
Yeah, that's wonderful, because I remember when I looked myself to find the psychedelic retreat, I knew, okay, I wanted psilocybin, I knew I wanted Canada, and there were not a lot of things popping up, so it's very helpful to have this bird eye view of the different type of medicines, different location, and the value you can get. So why do you think psychedelic retreats are such an important part of the overall psychedelic industry?
I think that for the consumer who is attracted to them, it's a natural sort of evolution from a lot of activities that they're probably engaged in already. So when I think about that, that suburban mom kind of user that we know is sort of driving interest in the retreat, they tend to be the same folks who are interested in going for a yoga retreat or holistic therapy, breath work. It's not just about going to the yoga studio 2 days a week. It's about making it part of your identity. It's really sort of core to who you are. And insofar as sort of the psychoactives, are a tool to help you reach those goals, we can see how, that group is interested in turning it into an experience, into a vacation. They're looking not just to have that sort of psychoactive experience at home or, under a therapist guise, but really to sort of immerse themselves in all of the different sort of modalities and holistic therapies that are on offer there. And, that's only going to continue. We've seen it grow substantially. Everybody I spoke to in Costa Rica and Mexico, there was really one common thread. We're growing, we're adding buildings, we're adding sessions, we're adding therapists, because the demand is so great we're booked up for 6 months. We just can't keep up.
Yeah, oh, that's wonderful, and it's interesting because you see different type of crowd in the sense that the psychedelic renaissance was coming a lot from the Silicon Valley folks, which were really using psychedelics as performance enhancement, while you see that crowd, which is more really looking for therapeutic growth type of enhancement. Very different demographic, very different goals, and probably very different way to go at it, because I think the Silicon Valley folks were really like microdosing a lot. Yes, going to retreat, but it was more like corporate retreat, was not really wellness retreat, you were doing ayahuasca to get better result and get to $1 billion valuation faster, kind of, So it's very interesting to see that change or evolution in the demographic, and it being more mainstream, it's more gentrification versus a renaissance,
I think that's very well put. Yeah, it's definitely normalizing. And I think, part of what we want to accomplish in Frshminds, which, should you make your way to the site today, it doesn't currently do. This is in our plans for the rest of 2023. We know that we need to rebuild our interface with our users so that they can get to those answers that they need quickly. There's so much information and there's so much inhibition. I think about sort of that new user who's maybe come along and tried psilocybin once, maybe with a trip sitter, maybe with some friends, and to then make the leap that, over a period of time, that I'm going to go travel, often by myself, to a faraway land with people who are, at a time when I'm going to be very vulnerable, working with people whose credentials I don't know. I've never met them before. Are they going to be professional? Are they going to take care of me in my hour of need? That's, there's a lot of questions there that somebody really needs to gain a lot of confidence in before they would, put down what's not an insignificant amount of money and make that trip. So what we know that we need to do is really just help them along that journey. Right? So, what is the decision tree, and what credentials can we look at, and what are the things that they should know to ask before they arrive, so they feel really confident with the decision.
Before I registered for my trip, my husband was worried. I was worried about the money. He was worried about, okay, these guys are going to fuck up your brain. Are you sure, like they're really qualified? And, so I have to say that I did my homework. So I was confident and probably less scared, I guess, So while he's probably more conservative, and he was very worried. He's like, okay, is she going to come up, with some
lobotomized?
Exactly. So it was very interesting to see his perspective, which was very different from mine. But I think you pointed out it's probably the amount of money, but also are these people qualified? And you vet a lot of the retreats and all of that. So that's probably giving a bit of a seal of approval. Maybe you should start your own certification. Like there is something that people would probably enjoy knowing that it's a 5-star from Frshminds,
That's something we're thinking about. And on a side note, in my travels in Costa Rica, I won't specify who. I don't know if they want me to share, but there's a movement amongst retreat operators in Costa Rica to form an association potentially, and it helps them in sort of advocacy with the government. And I think one important aspect of that, should these associations really start sort of coming together, is a kind of a universal standardization, or sort of seal of approval that no matter what, we're all going to operate a little bit differently with different psychoactives, but we're all going to agree that at the very least we're all offering this. It might be integration in sort of a formalized way. It might be sort of standardized care or certifications on site, whatever it is. I think that'll go a long way to helping sort of alleviate that concern. Whereas today everybody's sort of operating differently. And as a consumer, you're kind of like, well, they're not all created equal. Which one is better than the other? I really have no way of knowing.
Exactly. That makes so much sense. So as you started, digging in the world of psychedelic retreats, what's your prize due there?
I'm sorry, what's
your prize due? I'm sure you had some aha and ho moment as you were really digging into this world of retreat.
Yeah, I think, what comes to mind immediately is obviously the importance of integration as part of that experience. But the fact that everybody is doing that a little bit differently. Everybody speaks to the importance of it, so that's kind of universal. But in some cases, integration is a formal part of the program. You do it sort of immediately after your ceremonies. It will continue long after you've gone home. And if business aside, because there's obviously cost to supporting those initiatives. If I was to speak to a therapist, sort of what they would see as being most beneficial for the client, it probably is a fairly long-term engagement on a one-to-one basis, just to make sure they've really absorbed everything that they experienced. And I think it's something that's a little bit uneven today. There's some who are, everyone's speaking about it, but some are doing it differently than others. And as Frshminds as a marketplace, we're just a reflection on the industry. We don't sort of take a position as to which one is better or worse. And I think there's a lot of subjectivity there, but I definitely see some differences there, which are important for our consumer to know.
I agree with you. We tend to focus on the ceremony, and while actually it's obviously an important part of a process, but the integration is really what makes everything come together. And I'm not sure every participants understand that. Sometimes people are just like, okay, I'm doing my trip and then I come back right back where I was. And there is not much afterthoughts linked with the integration. But it's interesting you mentioned, like what medical professional might suggest, they have no clue more than anyone else, and it's very funny. The more I work with psychedelic, the more I realize people are so attached to the medical system. But, I would rather trust a shaman who's been, working with psychedelic compound for 20 years than maybe someone who's graduated from Harvard medicine, because they never touched that. It was not even in their curriculum. But still, we get very attached to what MD is going to tell us in that. And is it something you see as well? Yeah, it's very funny to me.
Oh, I mean, it's something that I live. I'm not, I wouldn't have come to the medicine myself if not for, entering it through Frshminds and sort of speaking to everybody. I'm kind of North American Western medicine, treat the symptom, not the problem.
Exactly.
There's a pill for everything. That's just kind of the culture that I grew up in. And it took me a while to really accept. But when you keep hearing over and over and over again, every retreat operator that I would meet, just their journey to the medicine, like how they ended up doing what they're doing, and the afflictions that they were able to overcome themselves. And the fantastic testimonials from the guests over and over and over again. After a while, you realize that, kind of like you said, Peggy, that this knowledge, which has been passed down for generations and centuries, millennia, it can't be nothing, right? I mean, it's too easy to dismiss these things because you come from a different sort of mindset, but the testimony is too compelling. I think of, again, I won't say the name because I don't know if she'd be comfortable with it, but I met an operator in Costa Rica who had multiple sclerosis and paralyzed, and she was blind and was doing stem cell therapy at the same time. So certainly that had an impact, but found ayahuasca and went on a journey and is in complete remission and is now being called to speak about her experience. And I said, if ayahuasca was even 1% responsible for this remission, and stem cell therapy gets credit for the other 99, it's still transformative for Western medicine. It still brings you into a completely different paradigm. Excellent. And I think at this point, from what I've seen, there must be truth to it.
Yes. At some point, you have enough anecdotal data over centuries, to your point, to, maybe go in a direction. I know that it's not, to your point, all the Western minds has been conditioned. But because we like expert, we like diploma, we like our certifications,
That's right.
But the reality is that there is a bigger world out there outside of that. So I'd love to hear your perspective on where you think the psychedelic industry as a whole is going. What does it mean for patients, the healthcare system? We spoke a bit about the Western mindset and the Western medicine. What's your perspective? Because you're very deep in the space.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, the growth is going to continue. And at some point, I have to believe, and this might be a little naive of me to say, but I hope I'm not wrong, that the science will dictate how the industry will develop, right? And I think of that recent, episode of the John Oliver show where he was sort of talking about, we've been here before and the science was equally compelling 50 years ago as it is now. We can't lose our way and allow, that progress to be corrupted. And I think that's a really well thought out point. The science is generally sort of pointing in one direction, across, entheogens. And I think, how the industry will develop is still a little bit of a question mark. Having come from cannabis, and I sort of use that as a yardstick, I think for the consumer, it will inevitably be very different. I live in Canada, obviously, and I can walk out the door and see 3 shops selling cannabis, most of them losing money and failing, unfortunately.
Exactly,
but widely available. And I can't really see that ever taking place with psychoactives. I think it's a different compound with different purposes, and the integration component of it being so important, it just doesn't lend itself to me to be sort of consumer retail. But I do think that as the science is proven out and pharmaceutical products reach market, having sort of passed through trials, that is going to open up a lot of minds that previously were sort of turned off. There's not an insignificant part of the population, as there was in cannabis, who will say, hey, listen, I'm open to anything, but as long as it's illegal, I'm not participating at all.
Yeah.
And I think those folks will flip very quickly, and I think it will just continue to sort of grow from there. So I'm hoping that our belief certainly is that retreats will continue to be, a core part of the experience. They're almost a different animal, and like I said, you can practice yoga at home, or you can go for a yoga retreat. And I think that experiential component, immersing yourself in the ceremony and the tradition, I expect that as more and more people come to plant medicine, sort of just in their day-to-day lives, that they will then translate into more and more people becoming interested in taking a journey like that.
Yeah, and like you mentioned that at the beginning of the conversation, but I think the network effect, I just see it around me between people going to retreats, microdosing. They might not be necessarily vocal about it outside their close network, because to your point, it's still illegal, whatever that means, because again, alcohol is legal. Is it very good for you? Definitely not. But, that's another conversation. But I do see more and more people being comfortable because their friend, their neighbors, their sister, their whoever has been doing it with great results. So they're like, wow, why not do it?
Yeah.
So that's I think to your point, it's just gonna grow. Same people doing it multiple times and doing it with more people. So it's a good spot for you to be in. We're already almost out of time. Do you have any parting words, anything you want to share with the audience listening and watching you today?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would say is that that consumer market, which, sort of the early days, we're still in early days, but the very early days in psychedelics, sort of, investment and understanding and sort of placing bets and figuring out where things are going to move. I think that the consumer angle, because, nobody had really sort of moved to a legalized environment, it was just sort of, put aside. And what we're seeing is that there's a not insignificant amount of opportunity emerging on the consumer. And, I think that it's in many ways, it's as important to grow, that element of the industry as it is to build out the next great drug product, the next great pharmaceutical. And I'd encourage people to think a little bit more broadly about where those opportunities in psychedelics will emerge and how to touch as many people as you can today, as opposed to 3, 5, and 10 years from now.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because why wait 10 years? And I understand, to your point, there is also the legality aspect. People have this Western mind and they're like, okay, I want it to come from AstraZeneca or Roche. But, I'm like, okay, my life, I'm not going to live 200 years. And if I can do it 10 years early, if I can do it now versus in 10 years, just because now it's legal and now I have Roche selling it to me for 10 times the price on their doctor prescription. I think at least for me, it's a very easy choice, But you
Yeah.
know what? 5, 10 years ago, I would have probably been like most people thinking, well, no, if it's not legal and if it's not coming from a big pharma, I'm not going to touch it. So
Don't trust it. Yeah.
it's exactly, I think there is a bit of personal work that maybe need to happen, and maybe critical thinking to understand what does it mean for anything to be legal.
Yeah. And I think that's incumbent on myself and Frshminds, as it is on many others in the industry, that whatever we can do to educate, to bring the science forward, to bring testimonials forward, to just make people feel more comfortable that they're making a good decision there it's incumbent on all of us really to just try to build this out and make as many people as comfortable with it as we can.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Jon, for coming, talking about Frshminds. We're going to put in the comments the link of a website. It's Frshminds without an E for everyone who don't want to look at the comments. And if you want to read the highlights, it will be on my Substack, so you can check out that as well. So thank you so much for watching, for listening, and thank you again, Jon, for being with us today.
Oh, thank you, Peggy. It was a pleasure.